Yeah, so basically the first thing was that we wanted to thank you all, because this was not a sure thing. It was not just like obvious that we were going to be able to raise the cash, especially since we didn't have a large pre-existing profile or something like that, like you sometimes get with like Kickstarters. So it was really nice that that a lot of our work got picked up by different online communities, and that kind of buoyed us over the finish line, and looks like we're actually going to exceed our target by a little bit, which is like really exciting. And while we're probably not going to be able to, in the immediate term, achieve some of our most megalomaniacal dreams that we laid out in that infographic, if we made like 100,000 or whatever, it is quite remarkable that we've been able to raise as much as we have, and we're going to be able to use it to do a lot of things. The most important of which is to pay our writers above market rate, and that's thanks to you all, for donating or just for liking and sharing and talking to your friends about us, and commenting on our articles. So from the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for doing that. It really has meant a lot to me personally, and I'm sure it's the case for everybody else on the team as well.
Confirmed.
Second that.
Even Leon is deeply
Well,
appreciative.
Leon's joined us for the celebrations.
Yeah.
Yeah, golly, it's been quite a ride. We're all pretty exhausted to varying degrees on varying days of the week, picking up after one another, and we're probably going to need a couple of days to just catch up on sleep once the clock strikes midnight on Saturday, or at 11:59 PST on Saturday. Yes.
No, I mean, for real, if you all ever get inspired to do a fundraiser for something, and I hope you do, because we need more more left-wing projects, more radical cultural projects out there in the world. And if it's something that you feel like you have the talent to do, you should. But going into it, you should know that the fundraiser is not like this afterthought that you can just kind of like do and then people give you money. It's actually like a lot of day-to-day work, for the publicity of it and for the administration of the fundraiser itself, doing those like update emails, doing
and many months of planning in advance.
Absolutely. At least 2, preferably like 4 months in advance, before you even start the fundraiser. You should be planning out all the different aspects of it, trying to get a mailing list together, all this other stuff. Indiegogo actually has an FAQ or like a ultimate guide type thing on their website that's like super helpful, but read that far in advance. Don't be like us, where we realized like 2 months before the thing was going to go live, oh wait, this is actually a lot of work, because we were like too busy putting the issue together.
I don't think that's a perception that was collectively held, James. I think it was going to be a lot of work a long time ago.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I remember doing research on this stuff over the summer. Like,
some of us were looking at that FAQ even earlier.
Okay,
and we noticed things.
Steve was sending us factoids many months in advance.
Like, oh wait.
He was slowly like indoctrinating us into what we should expect. Steve was sending us factoids.
Oh, by the way, so if you're part of an emerging worker cooperative project who might use Kickstarter or Indiegogo or something, and you happen upon advice that says, be sure to try, a good goal to have is to earn 30% of your funding within the first 2 days. Maybe discount that a bit.
Yeah.
It depends. I think it
because we certainly didn't, and it was like I think that advice was for more corporate outfits than us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who already have a big following, and we relied on pretty much word of mouth through Twitter and email and in person also, and streams like this to build up from basically nothing. And
podcasts.
And podcasts as well.
Really influential.
Thanks to all the hosts who have hosted us.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
we had a pretty lean operation, whereas some of the advice in the FAQ may have been for larger operations. But overall, though, definitely crowdfunding can work for getting little worker co-ops of various sorts off the ground.
Right. The logic of the 30% in the first 24 to 48 hours is that people see that it's gaining momentum, and then complete strangers who aren't in the same sort of ecosystem as our audience, which is the left literary and intellectual scene on Twitter and in general. It's like if you're crowdfunding for a new bit of technology, like a watch that monitors your when you speak at night, say, you're reaching you're really like shotgunning for like, a wide audience.
I mean, like you don't flutter in your sleep about socialism.
So you're really trying to reach quite a different audience and quite a wider audience. You know, our goals weren't in the several 100,000 / million range, which is typically what you need for tech. I mean, it would have been wonderful to earn that much. I mean, there's still time. You can still give us $100,000.
Yeah. If you wish to bequeath us $100,000, we can come up with a reward tier for you. We're open to negotiating that.
This is a deep value opportunity here.
Yes.
Get in on the ground floor of libertarian socialism.
If you want to help us just fully buy out a goddamn housing co-op. That'd
be amazing.
But
and what's best of all is that it is a guaranteed $0 return investment. Your money will go completely down the drain. I mean, you've never seen investments like this.
And I mean, who you know that, and you know what that means? That means no volatility.
Yeah, zero volatility. You don't have to worry about
zero volatility.
Up or down in value.
You get a return of words.
Yeah, you get a return of words.
Words that can help you build your worker cooperative.
We'll make a really nice mug if you give us $100,000.
That is true. Yes,
we will obey. If you ask us for a really nice mug, we will make Francis come up with a really nice. I am volunteering, Francis.
I will spin you your own custom mug from like clay. I've been meaning to get into pottery.
And also another tip, I apparently don't skip on mugs.
Don't.
The mug was a killer. For some reason, maybe somebody in the chat can explain this. Why did everyone want the mug? Because
I was not surprised at all. I was not surprised at all. I was like
a mug naysayer at first.
Yeah.
No, I was the one who was all in on mug.
I thought it was going to be the Totes.
No, you were really all in on Totes.
I was team Tote. I thought that the Tote was going to be like our.
No, I saw someone get another mug, and I was like mildly annoyed each time. But then eventually, it won me over.
Mugs, you can store easily. People don't tend to actually be drowning in mugs, whereas I believe I have a bag behind me that has 50 totes in it.
Yeah.
One of you actually ordered 2 mugs. That really confused me for about a day and a half.
Have ordered 2 mugs.
And so far, we've only gotten custom requests for the mugs.
It's true too. Yeah, maybe the 2 mugs because it's like, you know, like they live with their significant other, maybe, and it's like, you know, we want to have matching Strange Matters mugs. You know, like it's like
I guess so.
This is a Strange Matters household, and in the morning.
I think that for the demographic, I'm gonna go off of my weird psychology here, my weird sociology here. For the demographic of our market base, to sound like an MB anarchist to the max here, of like coastal people who are pretending to be elite but actually are have 5 roommates. The branded merchandise that they are the least self-conscious about showing off is their mugs.
That's true. I actually just took a swig from a mug, so I'm like a hypocrite.
Yeah.
See, I mean, I think that people may have reached a saturation point with their totes because it's kind of been a fashionable thing to do for several years now since the New Yorker released their sort of literary tote. I mean, in my mind, that really got the ball rolling, and since then people have kind of been riding on their coattails.
I think about I think about NPR going back to like the 80s. NPR and PBS totes.
Did they have?
Really?
Yeah. I didn't even know that they had tote bags that early. I also associate it with like.
See, this is me growing up with hippies.
See, in NPR tote bag. The logic, aside from the New Yorker, which has a certain international brand value too, the logic for me is the plastic bag ban. So people have been more interested in buying more fabric bags for their groceries and for their, random.
New York's got a plastic bag ban, and what has happened is that the grocery store that I get delivery from always sends 3 tote bags. It's ridiculous. I have so many. I don't even know what to do with them anymore.
Oh dear.
I've got one tote that's on that's just like where I'm storing potatoes right now. Another one that's just like full of bananas, so like the bananas don't have to like rest on the ground or like on a hard surface. The bananas are just like hanging from a doorknob in a tote bag. I'm wondering if I'm getting to the point where it's like worth like starting to make clothes. Starting from tote bags, get like very like Depression era about it.
I mean, it could be very fashionable.
It's possible. It could be.
Yeah, that sounds pretty wasteful. I wonder what the comparison.
Oh, it's extremely wasteful. Yeah. They charge me 25 cents,
like
which
plastic bags and material bags.
I
think people behave differently around them too. Like they're not just going to leave a material bag on the street and it flashes in the wind.
I was about to say like the sort of like amusement to me about it is that plastic bag, in terms of like how they actually changed like the broader ecosphere, a plastic bag ban doesn't make that much of a difference because material like durable plastic bags as opposed to disposable plastic bags are enormously more difficult to make, like 60 times the energy requirement to make the durable ones. So you have to be using your tote like a lot. The material and energy costs of making them is massively higher. It's very dubious that people actually are. However, the fact that like the overwhelming atmosphere of New York is not fluttering plastic bags flying up into your face every 20 feet is an incredible change from one form of environmental perspective.
Right. Yeah. I mean, certainly here, I can't speak generally here actually, but I certainly can't speak for New York or America. The price of a single cotton bag at the local supermarket is noticeable, and I see people. I mean, I do recognize a quite significant change in behavior patterns when I am checking out at a grocery store.
Yeah, I've also noticed like a lot more of it. I mean, I was living in Bushwick until 2020, and my local like it was a food town. I had a sea town and a food town, but the one that I would go to all the time is the food town for my groceries, and pretty much everybody under 30 there had a tote bag. And then it was like very much like an age type deal. So I've also seen the uptick of that. Changing times, I guess. So
we were talking about merchandise, and before then, the fundraiser and giving general advice and reflecting on this wild ride that we've been on.
Yeah. So do we? Maybe one useful thing that we could do is talk about. And by the way, folks, for those who've logged on, if you want to just type in questions in the chat, we can happily take those as well. So feel free to ask or comment whatever you like. Well, not whatever you like, but like nice things.
more compliments on JMC's appearance.
You're allowed to be mean to me.
Yeah.
You're encouraged to bully the nerd. So.
Well, that's bullying all of us.
But we're all
yeah. Oh, this is you found out my trap.
Yeah. So what so what I was going to say, sorry, I just slipped there, was maybe we could talk about next steps. Because I mean, people, they've ordered their merch, so maybe we should give them some kind of expectation about like what the next couple steps are going to be and when they're going to receive their nice little goodies.
Well, the primary next step is that they will hear from us. We are nailing down exact time, well, somewhat exact timelines with our manufacturers. You know, once the money is released to us, then we'll be able to place orders for the various pieces of merchandise, and we'll be able to, you know, place an order for the printing of the issue, and then you know, there'll be several other things in sequence that have to happen, and so we'll be sending out an official communication. Like, wow, this sounds, I sound like the government. I will be like probably posting on the fundraiser and also on our social media, and sending out an email about what you should expect for the various pieces of merch and when they should arrive within like a period of a couple of weeks. I mean, with a variation from of a couple of weeks. That's the immediate next step. What are the next steps are there, JMC? Because that seems like the master next step.
Yeah. So yeah, Steve,
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the immediate next step is we're going to send out an official communication saying what all of the steps are. But after that, and somewhat concurrently with that communique, once the campaign is over and we've received the money that's basically an escrow with Indiegogo, we'll use that to fulfill all of the merch orders and get them out to you over the course of the next several weeks and months after that.
And then we'll also communicate about a timeline for the release of issue 1 and the delivery of issue 1, and also issue 1's launch party, which I don't know about you three, but feels like, wow, another fantastic challenge.
So we've been thinking hard about how exactly to do the launch party given like COVID conditions and so on. We probably have to discuss it more, but it seems like it will happen at some point during the summer. But we have to obviously, like, you know, do a lot of preparations to make sure that it goes off without a hitch, and it's an exciting event. We have talked in the past about doing launch parties in multiple places as a possible thing, but probably this first go around that's not going to happen, because doing one launch party is going to be enough of a pain in the butt, on top of all the other things that we got to be doing, like, you know, disbursing the funds to the writers and doing new commissions for online and preparing issue 1, maybe doing first steps on issue 2 to get it out before the end of the year, potentially, maybe. So that's the kind of thing that we're going to be juggling all at once this summer, but it's really exciting. And I mean, one thing that is nice is that we now have the resources to be able to make good on a lot of those promises, thanks to you all. So so now it's kind of just about doing our part and being able to kind of, like, you know, step by step execute.
It honestly, it hasn't quite dawned on me. I don't know about you three, but it hasn't quite dawned on me that we have reached our target. And like,
Yeah.
It's beginning to feel slightly overwhelming, like not in a bad way, in an emotional way, that this is really real and we're going to be able to do this, and it's freaking exciting.
Yeah,
I'm incredible.
Gonna be a little bit real on Maine here, and we had been told when we were starting this fundraiser, oh yeah, you should hit like 30% of your goal in the first like 48 hours, and we did not at all.
You did hit 10% within one day though, which is pretty cool.
That's true. That's pretty cool. But we did not get anywhere close.
But we
30%. And so I spent like several weeks in this emotional state of like trying to figure out like, what do we do if we only get like half of our goal, or like 2/3 of our goal? Like, what if that's what we cap out at? What if that like 10% we got in the first 24 hours is like half of our total raising? Like, what do we do? Like, what do we do if we get into that? Like if we got like $5 for the entire thing, like that's one thing. That's like a solved problem. But like, what do we do if we get into this like weird liminal state where like we don't have nearly enough money to like really afford to pay for the things that we said but now we're not. And I'm still like kind of a little bit in that emotional space of like trying to figure out how to like scrimp and like look for like how do we like emotionally, how do we tell ourselves that we did a good job when we failed to meet our own posted goal, and like
preparing for things that are no longer possible.
Yeah. So I'm so yeah, that's
for one, I'm glad that we no longer have to worry about those kind of contingency plans, and can focus on what we actually want to do.
We're still running a reasonably lean operation.
Absolutely.
We can't take much for granted at all.
Yeah, $25,000 is very small for any kind of business, even publishing. But you know,
really,
we can make it work.
We're still hustling to grow, and we're still going to be hustling for a while, but we at least have this.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice that we're putting in the sweat equity of and when I say nice, what I mean is like it helps the business that none of us are getting paid yet.
It's good for our writers that we're not getting paid.
Helpful.
Really, it's nice, James.
Well, it's nice for them. I mean, no, absolutely. I would much rather have a situation where we can pay people not a living. Let's be real. I mean, even above market rate is not enough to pay your rent. Like usually, but still, like being able to pay people a good amount of money for what they did. Than like us having like an office like next door to like Jacobin HQ or something, or the Verso Loft in Dumbo or whatever. Like maybe the time will come for that eventually, but that's definitely not our most important capital expenditure. So it's nice to be on a team where everybody's in agreement, and we've got like what I would consider to be pretty good priorities and decent values in terms of how to use our common resources for something like good.
Yeah, it's worth repeating that at this early stage, it's like it's 100% focused on paying our writers above market rate, like we've been saying, and then lining up our suppliers and making sure that we can make good on all the merch orders, and you're setting up your subscriptions and getting your print issues to you. And we're going to try and do that as expediently as possible in the coming just couple months, really.
Yeah. And we're also going to be, I guess some other logistics here are that we're going to be putting up the paywall soon. So that we have to work out some of the specifics of that, but probably it's going to affect anything that's in the print issues. And once it's up, all the print issue stuff will be up. So you'll be able to see all of issue 1, but only 3 articles at a time, or however many articles at a time, unless you get a subscription. And a subscription is actually going to be more expensive if you get it after the fundraiser is over than through the fundraiser. So if you still want access to the lower rate for subscription, please try to act now. And there's only 48 hours left, or however many hours left. I actually don't even know. But until
pretty close to that, yeah.
Yeah. The because you can get your subscription, whether digital only or print and digital, at a subsidized rate if you donate to the crowdfunder. After that, you'll be able to choose from either a monthly rate or a yearly rate for digital and print.
Or you can choose to be a Solidarity subscriber then as well.
That is true.
And then you can subsidize us
Yes.
and our expansion
if you have
to status of monopoly co-op.
Yes. So so that's going to be how that works. And then I guess the other thing that's next steps is in between issue 1, which will be mailed out sometime over the summer, and issue 2, which is TBD. It depends on how quickly we can put it together. We're going to have, like any normal publication kind of in our sphere, we're going to have online content in between, and we already have a couple pieces lined up that should be coming your way in sometime in the next couple weeks, and we could always use more of them. So online content is paid, just like print issue content, and if you have friends who write freelance, or you yourself are a freelance writer, want to give it a stab, we have submissions guidelines on our website, which hopefully will even expand the submissions guidelines at some point, in order to kind of like give advice to first-time writers, the kind of things that we're looking for. But for now, we've got pretty decent guidelines, and you just send us a pitch at editors@strangemanners.coop, and we will look at it and get back to you within a couple weeks. And we try to get back on all our mail. We're trying to be good about that, kind of the Noam Chomsky rule. Yeah, that's going to be our online content.
And soon enough, we'll be putting up some resources on our website for early career writers, explaining like what they should expect in freelancing with us and freelancing in general, and also like how to be successful in pitching, how to approach pitching to be best prepared. We've promised that to a couple of people who've reached out to us already, but we had that we had been planning to do that for quite some time already.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I don't have anything to add to that. I thought I did, but then I didn't.
Because it's quite an opaque world. I think
it really is.
Well, each of us has been, well, I think, rejected just kind of flatly without any for previous submissions to established magazines. Like you don't get any advice of any kind, or something like that.
Right.
Sometimes you feel fortunate to get a rejection.
Yes.
Yeah, if you're responded to at all.
Yeah.
It's just like a we'll pass, thanks type message.
JMC hinted that our process is evolving, and really I think some agreement that we've come to is that we have to respond to people, even if it's just to acknowledge them very quickly after we receive their email.
Yeah.
And then we can't make promises to get back to them within a week, because that's just completely impossible. But we try to get back to people as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and it's the sort of thing where it's difficult to balance our needs as people who are putting in the elbow grease to get the stuff out to you all with our obligations to our existing writers, who oftentimes require like a multi-step editing process and blah 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 blah, and our obligations to our followers, and folks,
and ourselves as writers of our own pieces.
That's true too.
We're also living, breathing human beings.
Yeah, it's a big balance.
Complicated. Yes, we all have, as any writers in the audience will know, we all have complicated relationships to writing. Sometimes it's a breeze, other times it's a slog.
Yeah. And what I would like for the magazine, see, now the stout is making me sentimental. What I would like for the magazine is for us to be able to create a kind of rich community, which is not just the editors and not just the writers, and not just like a kind of like a kind of detached fandom which comments from the sidelines and has like a purely parasocial relationship with the editors, but then like that can flip on a dime and become really toxic, and toxic in many ways too, like some of them driven by the celebrities rather than the fans, but and others vice versa. But like I would like us to have, if possible, like a community, because I think that magazines historically, like the magazines that I really like and respect, from the past, like the Dial or Partisan Review or Mother Earth or Tribune or all these magazines that a lot of people haven't heard of, but that you've definitely heard of the writers who were published in them, like everyone from like Virginia Woolf to to Emma Goldman, to George Orwell, to Margaret Sanger, to whoever, of Thorstein Veblen. Like a lot of these magazines were communities of like, and not in like a utopian way, but like like people who started out as readers of them would send in letters, and the letters would get published, and then maybe like one letter was so good that people would actually like reach out and be like, hey, you want to make this into an article and stuff like that. And it was like there was a kind of sense of like a collaboration happening, like a shared community of production, rather than just like kind of like producers on one end and consumers on the other. Like it would be nice if we could create a community like that, which is also at the same time an artistic movement or a philosophical movement or things like that, and have it be like open and porous at the edges rather than closed off and and cultish and things like that. So I know that's a very complicated dream, but that's my fantasy for what the magazine could evolve into, is a kind of living community like that. And it would be nice if we could pull it off.
Right. And I hope I speak for myself when I say this, but I assume that I have a degree of agreement among the co-editors, that we have these three sections, the front pages, the futon, and the back pages, and our readers shouldn't expect that it's going to be too formulaic, that they can't submit like letters to the editor, or letters, or so far we haven't included that in our futon or in any of the other sections, but I think people should feel free to submit whatever they're thinking of for consideration. If it's good, then we'll publish it.
We want weird stuff. We want
we
stuff
want weird stuff.
published elsewhere.
Yeah.
Really weird stuff.
I think it should be. Oh, go on.
At one point, when we were conceptualizing the structure of the magazine, we were thinking of it as like a spectrum from like sort of tight and analytical all the way to like really loose and completely out there. So like the pages weren't the 300 pages weren't three sections, they were just like a spectrum. Yeah.
And it still hopefully could be like that. So sorry, Steve, you were gonna say something.
Maybe part of James's vision for what the magazine could be is hopefully possibly already taking shape in the form of like, even there's when one of us has an idea for a paper, it still goes through the same basic process as anyone.
Yeah.
I mean, it just means that one of us, whoever wrote it, kind of recuses themselves sort of from the editing process for a bit. But like, every idea we get is kind of put into a pipeline. Doesn't matter if it came from one of the editors or outside. I'm not sure if every magazine does that.
I think it depends.
I mean, I'm sure that I don't know. I really don't. I don't have.
It's hard to tell
on an editorial group.
In any case, I like that we do that.
Yeah.
I think
like if I were an outside writer, I would like to know that my work was being reviewed with the same rigor as if it came in-house.
Yeah. And it also keeps us honest too, because I think that, like, you know, these projects can often become, you know, I mean, there's one left-wing magazine whose name will go unmentioned, which was for a while basically the blog of the editor-in-chief. But but you know, like even short of rather exaggerated scenarios like that, the you know, there's a way in which these projects can become kind of like cults of personality around people who, once they get like a little whiff of fame, it kind of like goes to their heads and they start thinking of themselves as better than other people, or as kind of like you know, gatekeepers, you know, and that kind of thing. And the only way that I think to avoid that dynamic is through creating you know, formal processes, but then also like a larger institutional culture. I know this is very highfalutin, but like, you know, like ways of being with each other in a room where everybody can make fun of everybody else and it's not that big of a deal. You know, it's like and like, yes, we all respect each other very greatly, but like, you know, at the same time, if somebody's kind of full of it, you can, in a polite way, kind of say, I don't know if I really agree with that, you know, and that kind of thing. And I think that if I mean, that's the vibe that we try to cultivate internally with each other. And I think it would be really nice if that was also the vibe that we kind of cultivated in the extended community of the magazine to the greatest extent possible, you know, like
Right.
between us and the writers, between the writers themselves or among them, between the fandom and the editors and writers, and, you know. And I mean, if that really is the attitude, then I'm not really sure that it counts as a fandom anymore, right? Because the whole point of a fan is that you're a fanatic and you're gonna root for your team, right or wrong. Yeah, but like more of a community rather than a fandom. That's what I would like personally. But
and I want to emphasize to whoever's listening that JMC says that we've been. I want to emphasize that this horizontality and this sort of these attitudes that we've cultivated among one another, and also we've programmed into the structure of the magazine being a worker co-op, and the sort of processes that we follow, etc., has been deeply intentional from the very beginning. So that shouldn't be a sort of an aside. It's like deeply formative to the magazine and how it operates and everything that we're aiming to do here.
Yeah, I don't see nearly as much of a divide between our readership and what we have to do to deliver to our readership the products that we do, and, you know, who's out there enjoying it, and people who are submitting pieces for us to review. It's all just kind of, we're different pieces along the way of trying to build something together, rather than a passive audience who just gets to enjoy things that like this group of weirdos produces.
Although I also do hope that you do enjoy our weird.
Yeah.
Well, we are that, but we really want to just have a more egalitarian research program that brings in a lot more voices and all that good stuff.
I really want people to send us a whole bunch of really weird stuff. Please send us your weird stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, bring it on.
And once
we've already received some of it.
And once we do integrate some sort of system for receiving letters, which we have to design, and that's work, and we were working on the fundraiser, so have patience with us. But we will eventually have some kind of letter system, or at least we have talked about it before, and I think that there's consensus for it.
I wonder whether it would go in the futon, or like where it would go. It feels like a futon element.
I always assumed that would go in the futon.
We could do it that way,
but we haven't figured that out yet.
I personally really love the LRBs thing that they do with the letters, where like in the print issue there's a letter section, but like on the website, they organize the letters underneath the articles that they're in reference to, so that it's like almost like a replacement for the comments section. I love that. Like, I would love to see if we do that, and also cultivate. This is the harder thing, because this is like the audience needs to be part of it. But if we could cultivate the culture of letter writing or something to rival the LRB's culture of letter writing, because I don't know if y'all read London Review of Books. If you don't, and you're like a geeky literary nerd person, then you should, because it's amazing. It's like probably one of the best literary magazines in the world. It has about the same reputation as the New Yorker, but its quality, punch for punch, is like orders of magnitude greater than the New Yorker. And it's it does all the usual things: politics, literature, philosophy, blah blah, sometimes science. They're kind of like left liberal, sympathetic to radical ideas, but also like kind of moderate. But anyway, they have this thing where they have like letters, but it's very difficult to describe. But the typical LRB letter is like this extremely weird, like niche or pedantic comment on an article, but like in a like making fun of yourself kind of way. So it's like, let's say if somebody wrote like an article about like Margaret Thatcher or something, and then there will be a letter that's like, it's like, in so-and-so's article about Margaret Thatcher, dated whatever, like they mention offhand that her father was a shopkeeper. Actually, I grew up in that neighborhood, and I actually went to the shop, and there's this funny story about how Mr. Thatcher yelled at me for blah 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 and blah 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 blah. And then they'll have like all these little weird like niche things, and sometimes
slices of life.
Yeah, sometimes they're corrections of the article, but like the correction isn't like stuffy, it's like playful. And sometimes it's like an anecdote that supplements it. And then sometimes you have like these wars, like flame wars, that pop up, where like somebody gets like criticized in an article and they're like a politician. So the politician writes in, and then there's like this whole like extra set of articles, basically, which is like the long letters back and forth between the writer and the person criticized. It's very funny. One of my favorite things about the LRB is their letter section. It would be really cool to recreate that for the magazine, but obviously that's not something that we can do in like 2 months or something. It would have to be like a longer cultivated
force. Yeah.
But it's good to
yeah, I mean, yes, one of many dreams. The sort of gossipy nature of those missives sound like a futon element. I mean, I'm hoping that the futon is just like this treasure trove of really like curious and interesting bits and pieces to relax with.
Yeah, absolutely. Ditto here. And I'm really excited for the pieces that we have already for the futon. I'm just really excited for those. I think that people are going to enjoy them a lot. I've enjoyed editing them. So So I think that we've pretty much covered next steps. Do we want to maybe open the floor for? I mean, floor's been open, but
have you received any questions?
Yeah. So if anybody has any questions of any sort for us about anything, this is, as you can tell, this is a rather low key and chill stream, because we are all very, very tired from the fundraiser. So we're kind of chilling and taking it a little slower on this one. But yeah, if you all have any questions for us about anything, whether it's like a comment on one of the articles, or whether it's like this next steps business, or whether it's like future plans or your own ideas for things,
can we be a call-in show where you can ask for advice on like anything?
I would actually love to do a call-in stream. That would be so cool. We just need to set up like a Google phone, I think.
Well, what I'm getting at is, if you also wanted to ask us something totally not related to the magazine,
yeah,
and
describe
or any of us even at all, it's fine.
Your "Am I the asshole" dilemma.
Yeah, you can ask us if you're the asshole or not.
TXT weird experience.
Well, that's another thing is advice columns. I feel like those are a very underrated kind of content.
I mean, I don't underrate them. I love them.
I love advice columns. Yeah,
same.
Love advice columns.
We'd have to find the right advice columnist, I think, because I certainly do not. You don't want advice from me.
I will
My
write
life
an
is
advice
shambles.
column. I will write an advice column, and it will suck.
I
You
feel
can
like I
ask
could do
anything.
something with that form,
Yeah,
but maybe we shouldn't reveal.
yeah, that's true. Empress One had a really good advice column thing with Kristen Dombeck years and years ago. She hasn't done it in a long time. I don't know what happened. Maybe there's politics there or something. But
Well, I would like to think our combined wheelhouses should cover a high percentage of what comes in, but maybe that's not the case.
yeah, no, I think you're right. It's maybe that's what it should be. It should be like a group advice column
Yes.
where it's like
The hive mind. Ask
Yeah,
the hive mind.
yeah, advice column signed the editors.
Let us editorialize your life.
Oh God.
Wow.
So, how are we feeling? We're coming up on an hour here, so if folks don't have any questions, maybe we should think about kind of like
Beginning to wrap up.
yeah, like maybe like
Yeah.
conclusion.
We're asking ourselves a question.
Yeah, that's a good idea. But what?
Let's see. What do you see the magazine doing 1 year from now?
Ooh, that's a nice. You want to answer your own question? I'm curious.
Let's see. Hopefully, still pumping out issue 2, if not issue 3, question mark, who knows? And reaching a much wider audience who engages a lot, and you know, they're not just like passively consuming, they're like actively participating with us and like giving us critiques and whatnot in the form of letters to the editor and all that good stuff. Yeah.
I would say that my 1 year target is I would like us in 1 year to be able to have a cool multimedia ecosystem. It may not be doable in the short run, but maybe in a year we can have begun the process of, you know, branching out into like podcasts and YouTube and that kind of thing, and having that be like organic in a way, so that it's not just like, you know, these artificial appendages, but there's a kind of logic to it where, like, you know, somebody writes an article, so for us, so obviously they get interviewed on the podcast, and the podcast gets uploaded to YouTube, but then there's also like custom YouTube content on some kind of timeline, and sometimes that custom YouTube content can be turned into a podcast episode, or it can be like turned into an article, even like after having begun as YouTube, or you could do an interview that's in print about some filmmaker who made a short film for us or whatever. Like, in other words, like having it be like this kind of like interactive network of different media, leverages the advantages of each one to create a kind of ecosystem. And then maybe, you know, not even just our stuff, but having like, you know, partners, you know, whether informally or formally, who are also, you know, content creators of some sort who share our sensibility. And then we can, you know, either like informally have like these ongoing relationships with them where we show up on each other's stuff, or more formally, like maybe even like federate somehow. So that's probably more like 2 to 3 years, I would say, like by the time that we're talking about that kind of stuff. But like, you know, but that's the direction that I would personally like us to start heading in.
Okay. I see. Yeah, it's kind of curious that we're all focusing in different areas. I mean, I have very specific targets for design, but one other sort of quite deep-seated desire is that we publish many people from around the world. Right now, it is we're sort of cloistered in America and focusing on American discourse. And I think it would be incredible if we could gradually host a much more multinational conversation and get people, reading articles that are that we've translated. Maybe I don't want to speak too much on that, but we do have some plans, and yeah, I just would like for this not to be a solely American magazine. I would love to have influences from all over the world.
Yes, absolutely. Multilingual as well, ideally.
Right.
Yes. We did it a little bit with publishing our Russian comrades, right. On the war.
And we do have plans in the immediate, like we do have an article in the pipeline that'll come out in both Spanish and English. But
it would be nice if that was like the norm rather than like,
Right.
Yeah. It's a sentiment we all share. Kyle, do you have an answer to the question that was posed?
The question of where do I see the magazine in a year?
Yeah.
A year's a kind of short time frame, so you have to kind of modulate your expectations to what your actual expected growth is and such. And I think that within a year we'll probably have replaced a couple of governments and become the most cultural force on the planet.
Saw that one coming.
I know you guys. I was like, damn it! I played my hand too early.
When the People's Republic of
some of you might have tuned in for People's Republic of Vancouver Island and thought it was like a hypothetical, but actually that's also in the pipeline. So that's
just our 5-year business plan.
Yeah. I mean, we have Monopoly Co-op, which will become an entity within 3 years, and within 5 years we will have created an
it's simple. You start with a co-op, and then it turns into a vertical monopoly where it's a fully independent economic system unto itself, and then you just turn into a horizontal monopoly.
Yeah, there you go.
Just take it a vertical monopoly, and then it's a horizontal monopoly, and now it's everything.
You add it each time.
Yeah. And you make sure to start with a
magazine. Yeah. Magazine is clearly the fulcrum of power for the entire 21st century.
Absolutely.
There's one thing that we know.
The key industry upon which the entire axis of industrial society turns.
Once you've attained
goofing today.
once you've attained take autarky, there are no limits to your biophysical production.
Yeah.
Hey, Wooming 888. Oh, we've got a question from Blushful Hypocrite.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I hope I pronounced that correctly. Sorry for the specificity of this question. JMC, 5 years and one pandemic on. How much do you agree or disagree with the strategy laid out in your piece? Community, democracy, and mutual aid. That was not only JMC's piece. That was
I was about
the whole
to say,
Symbiosis cooperative, or Symbiosis group. But anyway, JMC, take the floor.
Yeah, so I'm going to preface it with the same exact thing, Francis. So that was not just my piece, and in fact, my contributions were, like limited to like 2 big sections of it. But then, like, it was really a collective piece. But I am the only person of that collective present that wrote the piece, so I guess I can kind of speak for my co-authors. Well, I'll speak for myself. So, but I think that the sentiment is shared by the co-authors as well, just based on recent discussions with them. So that essay, which actually won like a nice little essay prize by the Democracy Collaborative, which helps make co-ops, and it was judged by Naomi Klein, who I've never met, but she has she gave me and my friends $5,000 for that essay, and the nice big thumbs up that helped us get the Symbiosis Federation off the ground. So that was really nice. I'm very proud of that essay because I think that it was one of the first, not the first, but one of the first kind of detailed and long-formed articulations of the dual power strategy, which obviously has precedents, big time. We're not taking credit for having invented it at all. Bookchin was a theorist who, took the old discourse about what was going on in the Soviet Union in 1917 and then kind of turned into a general theory for libertarian socialist transformation. And then the practices of dual power go back to classical anarchism and even many state socialist movements. And, they were really put into practice by the Zapatistas in '94 and all this other stuff. So, a lot of people went into it. But in the North American, left-wing intellectual context, that essay was one of the first, along with Cooperation Jackson's early texts, popular articulations of the dual power strategy. And I still believe that the dual power strategy is important. And I think it's where it's at. You have to build institutions that put ordinary working class people directly in control over real resources, so that they can, self-manage, practice self-management over those resources, because learning how to govern yourself democratically, that's not just something everybody's born knowing how to do. It's a skill. And living in a society that is authoritarian, we don't develop that skill. We're used to following orders, and just kind of trying to fulfill our targets, with the minimum amount of effort. Different personalities can respond to it in different ways, but that's how I respond to living in an authoritarian society when I'm doing things I don't want to do. So I think that you need to create those institutions to give people practice, but then also to create a resource base that people can use to liberate themselves. Because, for example, once you have a tenants union and all the resources that go into that, you can start fighting to improve your life here and now, fighting the landlord's attempts to raise your rent, or getting them to do maintenance that they had been neglecting and things like that. And maybe from there you can build up to hey, maybe we can create some kind of community land trust that can take over the building. And that's happened in a couple of places where the tenants movement has been particularly strong. And then from there, you can start building housing cooperatives and things like that, and kind of moving progressively towards the socialization of the economy in real terms, not just waiting for some elected government to do it for you, which, by the way, they can't, because even if they do get elected, they can do things that help and that create an environment that makes it easier for people to socialize things. But at the end of the day, at least if you believe in a perspective that's more of the libertarian socialist perspective on things, socialization means ordinary working people being directly in charge of the systems that affect their lives, through one institutional mechanism or another. And that's not something that can be decreed from above. It has to be something that people do themselves. Although, of course, if you have a social democratic government, there's all sorts of ways that it can make it easier to do those things, whether it's by decommodifying healthcare so you don't have to worry about that anymore, or whether it's through full employment policy, or whether it's through the co-op right of first refusal thing or whatever. Now, in terms of okay, how does that strategy hold up after the changes that we've had? It depends on what interpretation you give to it. I think that there was always an interpretation of the dual power strategy that saw it kind of going hand in hand with social democratic reformism. And I think that interpretation is, in my opinion, more tenuous now, because I don't think that the nice little social democrats are coming, to save the day. I don't think that that's on the time scale that we have to work with before some real serious, nasty crises will start rearing their heads. I don't know if that's going to happen anymore. Whereas I think it was a real possibility before 2020. But I think it just didn't work out for various complex reasons. So I think that interpretation of how things were going to go might not be so much in the cards. I would like to be wrong about that, incidentally. If I am, then that would be great, but I'm not really sure anymore. But, dual power is an interesting strategy because it improves your odds no matter what happens on the macro level. You know what I mean? Because if your goal is to create, real autonomy for the working classes, if you have dual power organizations and you get a social democratic government, now you have a way of pressuring that government into doing the right thing, even though it doesn't want to sometimes, the way that the CIO pressured FDR's government to actually do social democracy, which was not entirely clear at the beginning FDR was actually going to do, right? but then if you don't get the nice little social democratic government, instead you get all the nasty stuff that can happen when things go really, really wrong, you also have a stronger basis because you control real resources and you know how to do it in a direct democratic manner. So if there's a crisis and people are looking for answers, you're there, you have an analysis of what is going wrong and how to fix it. You have been doing the things that you say ought to be done, and you have a practice doing it so people can, like, hop aboard. And now there's like potentially millions more people who want to hop aboard and start doing it. And you've already gotten the bicycle going. So you can kind of onboard them and then expand the realm of the sector of the economy that is under this kind of more direct democratic control. So I think that no matter what, dual power is the way to go. It's the thing that we can do here and now to increase our position, our strength, and also our potential bargaining power. As things get more desperate. But I also think that the opportunities for what kinds of things can count as dual power have changed. So whereas before I definitely would have emphasized tenants unions and cooperatives as like two things that seem like really obvious. Now I would add a third, which is unionizing your workplace, because with the labor shortage, it's now become a lot easier compared to how it was just a few years ago to do like large scale unionizations of the sort that we have not seen in this country for like 100 years. So I think that labor should take advantage of that opportunity. And labor is not the existing labor unions. Labor is you. And then when you and your informal group of workers at your workplace start bullying your boss into actually getting like COVID gear, if you're an in-person workplace, or into having better working conditions and more humane hours, more, against sexual harassment and assault and all these other kinds of different things. Once you do that, the unions follow, like some union will get in touch with you or you can get in touch with them, and that informal working group becomes the union. But it doesn't need to have been the union before. You can just do it yourself. And you now have a bargaining position where people are terrified to fire people because they're not getting enough workers. So this is the time to do that kind of push. So, it's kind of new dangers, new opportunities. But I would say that the strategy still makes the most sense to me, personally. And I think that that's true of, from what I've gathered from what like Kali Akuno has said in recent interviews, that's also where his mind is at. New dangers, right? Like, the fact that it's quite likely that we might get another far right government after the next election cycle because of the way that the Biden has been screwing up, or at least that's Kali's analysis, and I share it. And that, but on the other hand, new opportunities, because people, when that happens, people are going to be like, what the fuck, we have to do something. And if you're there with an analysis and with things that you can funnel people into, people will get on board. And if those things are direct democratic, then you've just strengthened socialism. So that's what I would say. I don't know if that's an adequate answer, but that's kind of how I feel about it personally. I'm actually curious. The question was directed towards me, and I ranted for like 100 years on it. I'm curious what my co-editors think about that. What do other folks think of the whole dual power thing?
Wu Ming in here said something I think quite that I think is actually going to go quite rapidly into how I kind of feel about things. That our social democrats are limited in what they can do, that they're very hamstrung, and I tend to attribute that to bias. Obviously, unsurprisingly, coming from my politics here, that is because of the intrinsic limitations of the offices involved. That simply taking over the existing power structures really just is just a changing of the guards at best. And me and James C went into this deep one day, and we might actually end up writing about this at some point. Soviet and worker control.
Right.
If you really want to have a really harrowing, very detailed historical account of the failings of trying to simply take over the power structure in a direct way, Soviet and worker control is a really harrowing account of watching workers win and lose power in the Soviet Union as the capitalist infrastructure continues and successfully claws back revolutionary gains very rapidly, very, very rapidly. And so, to my mind, this is why I think dual power is so important. That I don't like the world as it currently exists. I think it's bad. I think that we can do better. I don't think that I think that our ratio of effort to improvement is very marginal going through just trying to take over existing institutions. I know people who worked on that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez campaign. They put in an enormous amount of effort that, in retrospect, could have been much better spent.
I mean, I like the fact that Alex is there. I think she did some good advocacy, especially under Trump.
But I mean, that I think that
decisions under Biden, but but at the end of the day, it's kind of like, what should our investment portfolio of our labor hours be? Should it be 100% getting people like Alex elected, given what has kind of ended up happening, or should it be like maybe like 40% that, but then like 60% building dual power? And that's
and of course I am just 90% on building dual power. The only maybe if we include dual power to include like dismantling existing structures, then like 100%. You know, like I don't. Well, the argument that I do not think is a trivial argument, that just destroying the existing system means that we'll be putting the people who end up in that in this non-system place, who start off with the most resources, are going to become just a new aristocracy. I understand this complaint, which is why we need the dual power structure. We need a new structure to step into place. We cannot just parasitize the existing structure so trivially, is I guess all I've got to say. I'm done. Steve.
Can I talk? Yeah, I mean, I'm 90% there with what both of you just said. I think there's an interesting way in which, like when you say dual power, most people were thinking like, okay, these are people who don't want to do electoralism at all. But actually, it's like there's a way in which dual power could make electoralism effective in a way that it wasn't before.
Right.
In that you have, I mean, we know from looking at the petty right-wing tyrants that they can buy off politicians and just strongman them into state houses and then get what they want. And so when you have a dual power structure that is adequately integrated on both the vertical and the horizontal axes, and you have it clearly demonstrating that it can give people a better way of life than capitalism or Leninism, for that matter, can offer, then you have people just, you don't really have to make a rhetorical argument as much as for why people should join you. You can just point
material accountability.
Yeah.
You're meeting people's needs, and it's just apparent. And I mean, you shouldn't stop having rhetorical flourishes to get people to join, that's for sure. But you don't need to rely on it as much. And you'll have more resources to have potentially much more effective electoral campaigns on your behalf.
Yeah,
because you have the resources to just power people into office at like the state level or something, where they have more power to actually implement policies that can help keep the people who depend upon the dual power structure for their livelihoods safe and protected.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just about to like reiterate what all three of my present co-editors have said, which is, I feel, a great resonance with the point that building dual power is a win-win situation. You win in that you build institutions that are like much more informed as to what communities actually need, and are much more immediately answerable to those communities, and whose pipelines of money aren't just, you know, vacuuming resources to the top, to the top 1% or whatever. And through building these institutions, you build a robust base that actually has bargaining power with elected officials, should they be there. Yeah, and of course I have several other, like, I think that the idea of having more robust local institutions is also appealing to me in the kinds of community I think it would foster. It's generally aesthetically pleasing to me. I want more people to be self-determining in their own lives and in collaborating with their immediate community to have their immediate needs met. I think that fosters vibrant community, which I think could be a soothing balm to what a lot of us experience in this day and age.
Absolutely. It's actually really funny that you ended on that note, Francis, because I feel like that ties in really nicely into the next question that somebody put in there.
Amber, I was about to say that too.
Amber Speaks asks, hello, I was curious if anybody here has ever read anything from E.F. Schumacher. A lot of his ideas seem aligned with libertarian socialism and decentralized economics. So E.F. Schumacher wrote Small is Beautiful, which I have not actually finished. I have read part. Only for myself. There's a whole milieu that Schumacher comes out of, which is also like, people in like the 60s and 70s who have this kind of like people later on in like the 2000s sometimes call it like localism, and it's this idea of like small is beautiful, organic communities that are people sized, and like the kinds of things that you can do face to face or on a smaller scale and not be reliant on like these huge international supply chains or large scale industrial processes that supposedly require like top-down centralization. But if you have smaller processes, they don't require as much centralization and authoritarianism. And people with this critique is not just Schumacher, but it's also people like Ivan Ilyich in like philosophy of education, and it's also people like Paul Goodman in Libertas, I think it's called. He did this like utopia book with his brother about like what a perfectly liberated community would be like, and it also has this kind of like small is beautiful vibe to it. And I've been influenced by a lot of that, I think indirectly more than reading the originals, because like it influenced like Murray Bookchin, for example, in his libertarian municipalism, which is why he thinks the neighborhood is like this like really important kind of unit for doing things as direct democracy in cities. I still believe in it, sort of, but I have objections to it as well that I've developed. It's kind of like I'm in the mushy middle where I think that that's like 50% right, but then the 50% that gets wrong is kind of important, because I think that like if you go back as far as you can go in human communities, there has often been large-scale interaction and interdependency between human communities at quite a distance for like very, very long. So I think that there's sometimes a fantasy involved in the small is beautiful thing, which I don't think is actually the core of it, but I think is like often attached to it, of like being perfectly self-sufficient and like, like if we can just grow all our own food, we don't need food from outside. And if we can just do all this, we don't need stuff from outside. And that's sometimes true. You do want to be independent with some things, food and energy being top among them. And you don't always need huge industrial processes to do it. But it's not bad to have stuff from other places in and of itself, especially if you can figure out a way of making the supply chains like, like humane and egalitarian and democratic. I don't think it's bad that we consume anime, for example, in the US, even though we're not Japanese. And I think cultural products are, I think, something where people instinctively grasp that it's actually good for there to be these kind of like large scale interactions. And a lot of the small is beautiful people would not object to this, but it's something that they don't think about a lot sometimes. And then the other thing that's my objection to it is that there's an implicit assumption that large scale industry requires dictatorship. And I actually think that a lot of the best industrial science from the late 20th century, when these people were writing, pointed in the opposite direction, that actually like democracy and decentralization within large-scale industry actually helps large-scale industry be more efficient. And that's not always 100% true, but it's true enough that, principles like that, even imperfectly applied, could allow, I don't know why I'm on a Japan kick today, but like,
I mean, it's the Toyota method.
Yeah, it's the Toyota method. Like, the Japanese automakers kick the ass of the American automakers by imperfectly embracing those principles. I say imperfectly because the logical conclusion of them to me seems like anarcho-syndicalism. But at the same time, it's like small is beautiful is good too. It's just not the only thing that's true or good for me personally, speaking for myself. Like there are some things where I would like there to be even like global institutions that make sure that certain things that everybody needs gets done, right? But then at the same time, I would like there to be the utmost local autonomy, especially for things that are only best done at the local level. And then it's kind of like up to democratic communities of people through democratic processes to determine what those what belongs in what category and maybe renegotiate it over time. And then so for me, it's like, before we even get into like, how should we do these things, we have to have a process by which everyone can have a say in figuring out kind of how we structure things, and then like constantly renegotiating it. And we should have, I think, a pragmatic approach rather than like a dogmatic one. So I think the small is beautiful stuff is good, if not taken as dogma. That's basically like my and sorry, I went on for way too long with that. Anybody else have any thoughts on small is beautiful stuff?
I mean, Schumacher's. I tend to lump him in with a lot of like 60s, 70s crank types. And I don't even necessarily mean that disparaging. I've actually gotten quite a lot of joy out of those writers, because I'm the children of hippies, of unreformed hippies, and so these are this is a sort of comforting balm to me. But I think that I think he more so even than many of the others, I think his heart is in the right place. But I think that when Schumacher says that the goal is to evolve a more democratic and dignified system of industrial administration. If they cannot do that, if you can't do that, you have nothing to offer. I think that's profound. I think that's beautiful. I can look at specific elements of what he's discussing, and I can just say like, no, that's just factually wrong. Like his understanding of nuclear energy is just factually wrong. I don't know what to tell you. Like I've done the chemistry. I can tell you it's factually wrong. But it's and I mean, yeah, he what was the, look up a name? Political Systems of Heisenberg. I feel really dumb to have to look up the name of one of the most important anthropologists of all time. Edmund Leach. So he was actually in Myanmar around the same time as Edmund Leach, and it's kind of interesting to see this sort of like dark mirror thing where Leach, this giant of anthropology, who was himself like a Tory, who's just like unapologetically like, yeah, the British Empire fucking rules. Like this just fucking rules. This is so good to do imperialism, and like to see he has kind of like a bit of a dark mirror coming from a lot of the same inspirations of that. But I still ultimately think that Schumacher is, the applications of Schumacher have to be somewhat limited by the fact that he is very placed in his time. He's very much of his time and of the concerns of his time. And it reminds me, talking about Schumacher actually reminds me a lot of a very interesting article I saw a couple years ago about what is the defining emotional crisis of an era, which is just a lens of how you might view a given era. And this person talked about how when Marx was writing, the kind of defining emotional crisis was despair. And for the modern day, it is anxiety. But for the 60s, it was boredom. The 68 riots were about, more meaning, that these boring lives where you're working on an assembly line 24/7 are very different from the 21st century life where you're working 4 different gig economy jobs and like can't even tell what your hours are going to be today. It's a very different set of anxieties. I shouldn't even say anxieties. We have anxieties. They were trapped. Right. We are free to drown.
Right.
And so I do think that Schumacher, again, like I think there's some beautiful things in here. I think there's some useful things in here. I don't even think but I do think it is something that needs to be contextualized. And admittedly, I am very historically oriented. I think everything needs to be contextualized, but
just to reiterate, we love cranks here.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. To be clear, I want to be clear here. We love cranks. I'm not. The number of bad things I'll say about Timothy Leary is very short. But
Francis, you sounded like you wanted to get in on the Schumacher thing, so I wanted to.
No, I think all my points have been covered.
Oh no!
And,
sorry,
and I honestly haven't read him thoroughly. There are some resonances with actually people I've read in urban planning, but I don't really want to get into that. Just that it seems like writing that is of its time, and that is that gets a whole load of things right, and maybe unaware of I don't know, it may be read differently in the present age, and yeah, things of that ilk.
I will say in Schumacher's defense that he was not just an armchair economist. He actually was an advisor to the coal board, the nationalized coal industry in the UK, and like a top advisor to it, who actually helped like set like economic planning policy. So he's one of these thinkers who actually comes out of like being a practitioner planner, and those figures tend to be figures that we respect more on the magazine, because if you've actually done the stuff, you kind of have a sense of like the rhythms of how it works, and you're not just kind of like speculating based on like your axiomatic stipulations of what human nature is and then your deductions from those axioms. So that is one thing that's definitely in Schumacher's favor. But yeah, we do have, I think, some of these like critiques and caveats. But it's like anything else, right? Like we're not right about everything. And, if we do our jobs, we'll have some cool ideas. But then, 50 years later, the kids are going to be like, Strange Matters freaks, yeah, they were good on this, but they totally missed this other thing. And that's how progress happens. So,
And ultimately, like it's a cool and interesting like resonance to point out. Like maybe we should have someone write a piece about it.
Yeah, I mean, whoever Amber speaks, if you feel strongly about E.F. Schumacher and want to defend his honor against our critiques, I mean, feel free to submit editors@strangematters.coop a pitch for an article about it.
We do pay. We will fucking pay you to tell us that we're assholes.
Above market rate, even, which is, I ad nauseum.
It's kind of fucked up, but we will pay for this.
Ad nauseum. We pay above market
rate. Yeah.
That's fair enough. Amber speaks. But yeah, we are always actively recruiting new writers, especially if they can get in on a weird little niche bugbear.
Yeah.
The nicher, the better. If you're trying to solve the whole universe and you're trying to solve, scooter distribution or something like that. Maybe if you're trying to solve the philosophical problems of scooter distribution, the emotional labor,
what
the emotional
distribution tell us about being.
Yeah.
Now we might be getting somewhere. Yeah.
This is like a meme. Or it's like it's the WWE guy, and like each level he gets a bit more interested.
Oh god.
Oh no.
How will scooters be distributed under anarchism? That's a great question.
And I actually did have one thought, which is let me see if I can do a screen share here.
I want to read out, sorry James C, I want to read out some of these comments. Amber Speaks says, "Oh no, I'm just getting into his work. LMAO, stumbled onto him and he was interesting." Wu-Ming says, "Also grew up around hippies and E.F. Schumacher vibe was everywhere." Amber Speaks says, "How will scooters be distributed under anarchism?"
I mean, it's a real problem, right? Because I mean, let's not joke about that.
This was all over Twitter a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, was it? Oh, I actually missed that.
Well, how will supply chains be managed under anarchism?
Oh yeah,
it's not incorporated
ago,
into
yeah.
I mean, we got to start small, right? Like food's been solved. Like that's been solved. Like food under anarchism. That's been
how will anime be produced under anarchism?
Yeah, but like scooters is an interesting one. Like do we? I actually no. Let's go. If we're going to go insane, buses. How will bus routes work under anarchism?
Yeah, and
there's an insane one.
Transportation.
Let's go insane.
Right? Which is also about road design, and stuff. Like I actually really like the scooters thing.
I do. I genuinely do like this
because it's like bike shares. Bike shares are like the pet project of neoliberals who want to beautify cities without putting any real resources into public transit. And therefore, they kind of have a bad name among anti-gentrification people. But there is a kind of like kernel of emancipatory potential in bike shares because, I mean, the notion that you don't have to invest in buying a bike or worry about getting it stolen, but you can just like, you have your little card, you flip it, and then you get the thing out and you ride it to the next place that then park it. That's really cool. But there's lots of problems with it as it's structured right now, because you can have a bike share program in a city where you can't ride a bike safely, right? Like, and you can like, okay, how do you know where the where the next bike share place is that you can park it? Like, the nicest bike share programs have like GPSs built into the bikes that you can use to get you places, but that's like really expensive. So you would need to have, not just like, oh, this is the Band-Aid that we put on the fact that our city has a broken transit system, but you would actually need to have something like a social democratic, public spending initiative to, they build in the GPSs and have the roads be all nice and stuff. And like, for bikes and blah, 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 blah. And then you have to make decisions. Like, do you prioritize like bikes over pedestrians or over cars? I mean, over cars, yes. Over pedestrians, I mean, it depends. You want to have like, so it's like this cool like thing that unlocks all the kind of,
it hits. You end up inevitably getting into this really complicated. I would even call it ethical discussion, like this sort of like pre-rational discussion of like what is a good living space. Yeah. What is a good city at like a very basic level, and Francis, I think, actually might have the most thoughts about this. But
yeah,
I know that
you're our expert on the subject.
Yeah, you're our actual
but you said that you wanted to avoid getting into it.
That's fair. So in the interest of avoiding dragging Francis into her own area of expertise.
Yeah, it's like 3:40 in the morning.
I can say that like me and the editor who could not be here today, Quinn, me and them have gotten into like extended shouting matches over the course of like weeks and months, that like I like Quinn just was like, oh no, like just density, maximize density, sci-fi arcologies for everyone, and I'm just like, I don't think that's necessary. Just let some people get claustrophobic. Let them live in their little rural podunk-ass towns.
It might not be possible.
Might not be possible.
Anyway.
I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's desirable. And I mean, my take, as I've said many times, is that suburbs are an inevitable byproduct of herbs.
Of what?
Of herbs.
Cities, in other words.
Of the city.
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. If you build Uruk, you get suburbs. Like I've seen the archaeology.
I thought you meant like herbs. I thought you meant herbs.
No. I'm talking like I mean, I've seen the archaeology of like Hattusa and stuff like that.
But as somebody who's been traumatized by the endless sea of like cul-de-sacs and
I mean that's still just shitty design. That's still shitty design.
There's suburbs and there's suburbs.
Exactly.
In Europe they have something that they call suburbs, which are like not suburbs.
They make much more sense.
No cul-de-sacs.
They make much more sense. I come from the deep suburbs of New Jersey, and let me tell you that no greater mistake has ever been made in urban design in the entire history of humanity. Like even Soviet tower blocks, I would take them over the suburbs, and that's saying unlike those.
Yeah. I mean, a prevailing issue in American design of urban space is just the speed with which it's designed, because not enough thought is able to go into pumping out massive numbers of suburban residences. You end up with cul-de-sacs that nobody anticipated that kids would just get stuck like at the ends of cul-de-sacs, and there would be a new class of soccer moms having to cart their children around for hours a day, etc., etc. But these are the inevitable consequences of people building living space too quickly without enough time to actually think about what the people living there would need.
And of course, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go for it.
Oh yeah, dude. Just I mean, within the case of like America, like the American suburb that was exported very extensively by us, as you've written about before, and interestingly, I learned a few months ago, was originally a Soviet urban planning philosophy. The urban planning philosophy of orienting a city around cars specifically as a technology is a profound mistake on several levels, not least of which being that cars just kind of suck. But I think even kind of more deeply and profoundly, you have started from the premise of this, we have made a space for people to live that serves the machine.
Yeah, and not the people.
Yeah, people cannot navigate it by foot, which is inherently exclusionary.
And vile.
builds yeah, I mean, in apartheid city plan, I mean, this was a factor in segregated planning. I mean, you know, covertly segregated planning in New York State. And in apartheid city planning, it was an absolute, you know, the color lines were drawn distinctly around modes of transport and who was able to access different places through different modes of transport. Yeah, you know, I can ramble on about this forever, but I shouldn't.
There's a apparently, I've learned that it's actually not confirmed. I had been believing it was confirmed for years, but apparently it's apocryphal that when Robert Moses designed underpasses in New York, they were deliberately designed to be too short for buses. I've learned that that may not have been deliberate, that he did it, but he may not have like explicitly gone out of his way to do that. But at the same time, like I don't know why I don't know that we need to hand it to Robert Moses.
Are you absolutely sure of that?
I'm not. I am absolutely unsure. That's the reason why I bring this up.
Yeah,
I'm absolutely unsure.
Yeah, no, I read in a pretty authoritative historical article about this. Yeah. Anyway,
I don't want to say nice things about Robert Moses, but
I wanted to
he was terrible
on this kind of general tack of things, because despite the fact that my answer on Schumacher was long, I actually feel like it was quite inadequate, because what I was trying to do was paraphrase this footnote. Y'all are seeing footnotes and not a chat, right? Just so I can. Yep. Okay, cool. This is in our essay, Socialism with an Anarchist Squint. It's footnote number 26. I think that this kind of like captures. It's not obviously like, you know, this is not like written down as like the 10 Commandments tablet or anything like that. But this is kind of like where some of our thinking has been with this stuff. The most famous critiques in Western academia of overly centralized, high modernist central planning, although they're sometimes interpreted, including the last by their authors, as critiques of economic planning more generally, are Jane Jacobs, The Death and Life of the Great American Cities, and James C. Scott's Seeming Like a State. But these are just among the few officially canonized examples of a much broader tendency that arguably define the lives and work of nearly all the most radical socialist and anarchist thinkers and revolutionaries of the late 20th century. It's like a general train of thought from like anarcho-naturism in Spain and Latin America to Adorno and Horkheimer, Lewis Mumford, Rachel Carson, Paul Goodman, Serge Mallet, the Situationists, the various new lefts, E.F. Schumacher, Leopold Kohr. Leopold Kohr is a really interesting name who's in this same kind of like small is beautiful type milieu. You might want to look him up if you don't know him. Ivan Ilyich, Jacques Ellul, Murray Bookchin, Freddie Perlman, Leila Abdul-Rahim, Vandana Shiva, and then also indigenous-led movements like the Zapatistas or the water defenders in places like Bolivia and elsewhere in Latin America. Canada, etc. It's a critique that emerged from lived experience under the yoke of highly centralized and authoritarian industrial societies, whether capitalist or state socialist, and their planning apparatuses. There's much to commend it. Like, we've learned a lot from these people, so it's not like a blanket dismissal at all. But you know, and any economic planner must contend with its insights. But conversely, these critics of, you know, classical Western instrumental reason, technologies of domination, epistemic imperialism, etc., should remain open to the possibility that in order to accomplish the goals that they have as radical democratic movements, we have to learn how to plan, but to do so in a better, freer, and more truly intelligent, because democratic, decentralized, and decolonial fashion, rather than just like dismissing the idea of economic planning out of hand as evil or impossible. You know, and it's not to say these thinkers did do that. Like, so, you know, like some of them certainly did not. And we're trying to think through like what planning would look like in a more democratic fashion. But in their reception, you oftentimes see this kind of like attitude of like anti-planning, you know, and like the result would be like the super local society where you don't have to think about that stuff. But there's really no escaping it. Even in the local society, you have to have some kind of way of planning things. And so, and oftentimes like you can't be totally autonomous. So you have to figure out how you can get what you need from elsewhere, and how you're going to do that in a way that's humane and according to your values. So that's kind of like the network of concepts that we want to be working with when we talk about that stuff.
Wuming has a question. Do folks think that how we arrange common spaces in cities would be different under anarchism? For example, people who want to do welded street art or work on homemade robots, or for that matter, dyeing fabric or messy things that need outside or shop type space that is hard to find in dense cities?
That's a great question. Yeah, I've had lots of, it's funny, Francis said street art when it was welded steel art, but that's a great,
Oh, sorry.
but that's a great Freudian slip though, because street art is also a huge part of this, right? And that's not just a space thing, it's also like an aesthetic thing. Like, people think of it now as like graffiti. This building has been ruined by the fact that somebody has like drawn on it. But I often find graffiti is often like nice to have around. It gives a place character, and can oftentimes
I mean, it's one of the first steps towards gentrification in this day and age.
Well, that's true too.
I mean, it's become so formulaic that developers commission artists to do graffiti-like work in places where they own property, so as to gradually boost the property prices over time. But anyway, this is a curious question, and I don't have the answers. But something I will note is that our cities haven't always been as overpriced as they are now. It hasn't always been so expensive to live in a dense place. In fact, there have been sort of cycles of movement towards the city center and movement away from the city center, like in white flights from New York, and dilapidated cities have tended to be much more affordable places, which is why you have this sort of myth of the grungy artist occupying these buildings that nobody else would inhabit, and how Soho became what it is today, although it's now some other disastrous creature. And then then a place for artists.
So
it's a place for like high commodification of I don't know what. But dilapidated space is cheap space, which is tended historically to be artistic space. And for a long time, that was like post-industrial spaces on the fringes of cities. And perhaps it should be coded into how, perhaps there should be intentional planning around like maker spaces in urban city centers. And there should be like, places like, I don't know, like Christiania in Copenhagen, where there are virtually no rules and people just get to create whatever they want in this sort of region. That's a very different situation. But I agree, it would be wonderful to have these kinds of spaces prioritized in the centers of cities. Imagine what kind of a different message that would send than prioritizing, pristine mowed lawns and like massive skyscrapers that are completely inaccessible to the person on the street. Imagine. Maybe we can do it.
No, that's so cool.
Go ahead.
Well, it's just kind of like when you talk about Christiania, it reminds me of Exarchaea in Athens, which of course was not a planned decision. It was that the anarchists were like hegemonic in this neighborhood, so they were able to basically turn it into an autonomous anarchist neighborhood that is now a tourist attraction, literally, because it's so famous internationally. But imagine if zoning, you decreed an Exarchaea in the center of the city. I mean, that's basically what you're talking about. It seems to me. And I think that would be an incredible aesthetic thing. Also something like, graffiti. Graffiti is so interesting because like, if you watch old videos on YouTube of Marshall Berman, the great Marxist humanist, art critic, scholar, interdisciplinary humanist person, Marshall Berman talked about what the subway graffitis was about. And what it really was about was like that the city was falling apart, and people who had to take these trains every day, it was so grim and depressing with like the gray on gray of the trains, So what they did is that they beautified the trains, and they didn't wait for permission for anybody to do it. It was a form of direct action that led to this, like, these subway trains that would be covered like end to end with like beautiful, like multi-layered, like kind of colorful art. And a lot of people saw it as a sign of the city's decline, but others looked at it as like hope that, like, even in a declining city, you can beautify it in this way through like this like democratic direct action. So here's a thought: like, what if New York City actually gave a fellowship, like on a yearly basis, to an artist or a set of artists, right? And it was a competition, and the artist or artists, plural, that win get to decorate the subway trains that year. Like, and all the subway trains were always decorated, but it was like this prestigious thing that people want to do, is to decorate all the subway trains, because, and the city can do that, right? Because the subway trains belong to us, right? The people, right? Like, we, the people, own the subways, and therefore, like, the artists among the people. It could even be an election. Why have it be some expert from some art academy be doing it? Why not have it be a democratic process that anybody who wants to vote in it can vote for what the subway train should look like? Like, why not? We have all the technology that would let us do this. It's not this crazy kind of utopian thing. It wouldn't even be expensive at all, really. Like, it would just be a city program. But why not do it? Because they don't want us to believe that the city belongs to us. They think that the city belongs to the people who own it, directly or indirectly, and that those are the people who should be making the decisions about what buildings get made and what the aesthetics of the city ought to be, so that we all end up living in the same freaking crystal city that's made up of buildings like the Shard in London or One World Trade Center, that all look the exact, like they're from the same like, dystopian cyberpunk, Mirror's Edge future. And it would, like, it's, if you left it up to the people, I think the people would do better. So I'm 100% behind Francis's vision there.
Tirade. Okay.
Well, can I add something?
Yeah.
That's a really great question. I've been flipping it over my head several times, and I'm like, so yes, we should. I agree. We should rearrange common spaces for the type of works that Wuming wants to see more of. And it is messy, and so it would need it's the type of work that would be happening, I would imagine, in a garage or a industrial space, perhaps an industrial space that someone like lives in, maybe, or something. But it's like, if it's happening out in the open, it would be like you're imagining kind of like an inventor working on robotics or something, and it's their personal property, but it's out in the open, and people are just asking them questions about it. And perhaps they bought a property in one of the dozens, if not hundreds, of like former industrial towns in upstate New York or something, or the ones with like Dutch names that are like extremely low population, even though it looks like they could support much more because in the past they did. Or in Detroit or something like that. And the practical steps that we could take to develop these types of things are, none of it is pie in the sky. It does take money. It does take resources like time and skill and whatnot. But like, it's just things that we already have all of these things amongst us. So we could rearrange the common spaces such that this work on like building new robots or something for like a business that's like a worker cooperative that leases out robots or something like that could take place.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the key thing to push for is more democratic deliberation over how space is allocated in cities. And right now, sort of money is, the dollar is king, money rules. But there are these traditions and there are organizations pushing towards more public involvement in how cities are planned. It's an uphill battle, but not one the tools exist. It just needs to be pushed for, and you know, several layers of obstacles need to be overcome.
Kyle, you were going to say something before, and then I cut you.
I was going to participate in perhaps the most obnoxious behavior somebody can take part in this kind of discussion, and read a poem.
Yes.
Let's get weird. I mean, this is not
great.
weird, but
Yeah. The law locks up the man or woman who steals the goose off the common, but leaves the greater villain loose, who steals the common from the goose. The law demands that we atone when we take things we do not own, but leaves the lords and ladies fine who take things that are yours and mine. So in the 16th century, so the common and woman rhymed at the time due to changes in vowel sounds, so I didn't feel like replicating that because I'm not an expert. But yeah, I mean, we have had that historically. As actually, I was also frantically searching my copy of Conquest of Bread because Kropotkin talks about maker spaces in St. Petersburg in the 19th century. You know, under a different term, obviously not, but yeah, I suppose I do have my own kind of. I am usually the one who is the most straightforwardly anarchist in most conversations, and I do think about the fact that my scientific background, such as it is from chemistry, and my thought about why you have segregated spaces for doing chemistry is because it's extremely poisonous. And you mentioned dyeing, and dyeing is a famously poisonous activity. And so that's an interesting question of how do we make sure that people are not, you know, poisoning common areas, you know, not doing their dye work like right next to a drinking fountain or a fountain that children play in. But it is something that, in general, my main kind of thought is that we use our space hideously inefficiently. The space exists. I live in Brooklyn. Brooklyn is a famously hyper expensive area, and people say like, oh, like we can't do more with our space. We can't be cheap with our space. The space needs to be expensive to keep people from using it frivolously because it's so in demand. But the major use of space around here is for fucking cars, which everybody hates.
Yep.
Nobody drives cars. There are like 10% of the people around here drive cars at all. I have a driver's license that's considered a bizarre skill for somebody living around here to have. And like I've lived in most of the other parts of the country and everybody has a driver's license. No, people fucking hate it. They're the primary physical menace I'm subjected to. And we're hideously wasting space on that. And obviously also, you know, we have, 6 empty houses for every homeless person in this city, 28 like nationwide or some shit at this point. Like, it's not like we're lacking for space. And I mean, when people talk about the farmland, I'm from the Midwest. I've seen those farms. Like us trying to squeeze people out of a Steinway boardroom show in Lower Manhattan, that is not going to make or break our ability to produce corn. Like that's a ridiculous argument. That's a ludicrous argument. We have the space. We can make better use of it. I do think that we should have spaces where people should feel more safe being in public. And, you know, to anybody who's watching New York local news, we are currently in a purge against public space.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what Occupy was about.
Yeah.
People forget that's what Occupy was about as like an immediate sort of thing, was that the park, which supposedly was public, it was really public with an asterisk under some public-private partnership bullshit, which is why they were able to be evicted. You're not allowed to be evicted from public space doing a peaceful demonstration. That's against your First Amendment rights. But it was a privately owned park leased for public use, you see, to the city. So a great deal of what Occupy was about in a visceral, immediate sense before all the other demands was, and there were other demands, incidentally. That's a common misconception, was that there wasn't. There were, but the you know, it was about reclaiming that public space. You know, regardless of what the piece of paper says, like, this is a park, it ought to belong to the public. And that was a radical statement because it awakened or reawakened this sense of what the common poem about the goose is about, that there is or ought to be something that is held in common by everybody as the basis upon which we build our individuality, and are able to express ourselves. That for me is what socialism is about. It's not about turning everybody into identical robots. It's not even about, worker control over the means of production, because that's the means. But what is the end of that? The end of that is so that we can construct our lives collectively and individually in such a manner as we choose, and be in control of our own destiny and live our lives like works of art. And works of art are partly individual expressions and they're partly collective projects, but we should be the ones who decide rather than the masters of the universe. And I think that the city, these questions of the city and how they should be designed are often the most visceral and direct way of communicating that. But I think it's just as true in the factory or in the warehouse or in the office.
Self and collective actualization, baby.
Yeah.
So we are coming up very late. And I was going to leave this kind of like one quick question, going back to an earlier comment. Amber Speaks, if you have experience in the film industry, please write to us.
Yes.
We might have some questions for you. And I think we should probably, is there anything, I think we should probably close to questions at this point. And just get ready to wrap up. So do we have closing comments?
I think that was mine. So if other folks want to go.
Who answered? Who has answered? Sorry. What are we suggesting we do?
I'm just suggesting closing
comments. Statements, basically.
Including statements.
Yeah.
Whew. I think I'll just rest my case with self and collective actualization, baby.
Yeah, I like that.
Steve?
Let's see. It's kind of hard to sum up when, part of it was like next steps for the magazine, and then another part was about geese, like geese and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I'm optimistic.
Let's see. Well, this last, I don't know, the last 20 minutes or so, I want to have like 1,000 times more of this type of conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this was lovely.
So,
This was lovely. You all were a lovely audience. If I have any kind of, I guess, closing thought, it's from, we only hit our fundraising goal yesterday, I think, the day before. It was very recent.
Something like that.
Yeah, like last 48 hours. And it's one of those things that, we started off, I started off discussing with how disheartening. Early on, I discussed how disheartening it can be to try to get people elected and then they just kind of do nothing. You put in all this effort and then they kind of do nothing. And by contrast, what we have seen is that within the degrees of freedom that we are entitled, that we still have access to, within the empowerment that we still have access to, there are things that we can change. There are things that we have power over that we can affect. And it can be disheartening to look at, oh yeah, we got this person elected and then they didn't do anything with it. And like, it feels like that nothing you do matters. That's one example. There's many cases where you look at the world around you and you look at what you can change and you just go, oh, this is all so big. How can I do anything about this? But the simple fact of the matter is that that you are one person. And we are 5 people. And we have managed to reach out across the grand barriers of space and time and touch some people in some very heartfelt ways. And they've reached out and touched us by having this fundraiser succeed, which sounds like an insane neo-lib thing for me to say, but it has been really good to see that people love to see our weird little anarchist economics magazine that makes ass jokes, and that they love that enough to put things down for us and to make sure that we can make sure our writers are paid. And like this isn't just going to be some sort of like dilettantish hobby. Like this is something that we might be able to make a real go of, and we do have even beyond that, we've got incredible ambitions. JMC can talk eloquently about spreading this out into larger cooperatives in not just media, but in publishing, not just in publishing, but in production, not just in production of like printing, but also even further, housing, the merchandising, food, like these are things that people have done, but it's also good to just kind of have this very material evidence in our hands that we can do this, that people want us to do this, and that hopefully we can help more people take some control over their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And
have some fun along the way.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And delight, because that's important. That's not an afterthought.
To what end?
If we're not, if we're not creating beautiful things together, then what is the point of any of this that we're doing, right? Because that should be the goal of anything, is to create more beauty and meaning in the world. I guess my closing thought is just thank you to all of you out there who have been supporters, donors, interlocutors, it makes it feel worth doing. And I'm kind of going through a rough patch sometimes in certain aspects of my life right now, so it's also a reason to get up in the morning, and it's really, it means a lot that the stuff that we've done has resonated enough that it's inspired other people to kind of think and even write or do stuff in their own lives, so thank you for that. And this has been great. I think that if you have any thoughts at all, feel free to send it our way on social media or editors at strangematters.coop. We've got all the stuff that we mentioned lined up for you in coming weeks, but if you have any of your own ideas for it, let us know, because we're really open to potentially making stuff happen. And thanks so much for all your questions.
There are already some great potential pieces that have come up in this discussion, so please write in.
Don't be shy about potentially putting yourself out there. We're not about being gatekeepers, and if you're a first-time writer, we'll work with you. It's not this kind of thing just for professionals. But if you are a professional and a freelancer who feels like you have ideas that other places won't take for one reason or another, come to us as well. We really want to build up that community that I was talking about earlier.
The goal is that everybody has control. Everybody has dignity. Everybody should have control over their life. Everyone should have a say.
Yes.
In this world. And we are going to put our money where our mouth is on that one.
Yep, absolutely. So I think that we couldn't possibly end on a better note than that. So we should probably wrap up the stream. But thank you, everybody, and have a great night.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.